Welcome to Faith, Hope, and Stories. There are many people in our coastal community planting seeds of faith, hope, and love. Some you may know already, and others you don't know yet. They're your neighbors, and they have a calling, a mission, a purpose. These are their stories. Faith, Hope, and Stories is a production of Epworth United Methodist Church in Rehoboth Beach, Delaware. Welcome to our podcast. I'm Leanne Walling, and I'm here today with my podcasting partner in crime, Pastor Bo, the Reverend Dr. Bo Gordy-Stith, the school bus driving pastor. Wait, what? Yes, you heard right, and we'll get there in a minute. Ebullient is not a word I use every day, but for some reason, it's the first adjective that comes to mind when I see Bo in action. Ebullient describes a person or mood that is cheerfully overflowing with enthusiasm, energy, and excitement, often characterized by a bubbly or high-spirited demeanor. High-spirited. Yep, that's Pastor Bo, and a lot of us know he can preach. We sure know he can sing. We know he went to the Naval Academy where he met his wife, Pastor Vicky Gordy-Stith, and served as a naval officer all over the world. He's the pastor of media and communications at Epworth United Methodist Church in Rehoboth Beach, but he actually spends more hours a week driving a school bus. He's driven kids of every age, now for Cape Henlopen School District and previously for other districts in Delaware and North Carolina. And that's what I want to talk about, not 21st century Christianity or theology. Well, maybe there's some theology involved in there somewhere, we'll see. But even if I needed a second job, driving a school bus would probably be about 587th on my list. So, Bo, we want to know why you do this. I get the sense from listening to you talk about it that it really feeds your soul.
Yeah, I kind of backed into it. It's interesting. I had driven a school bus, if you can believe this, as a 16-year-old and 17-year-old. And for the Wake County school system, I can't fathom why. I had other jobs, that sort of thing. It was a long way to get to school, so it was like, oh well, they'll pay me to go to school. What I have figured out later in life is that I have a passion for being with kids. And so maybe even as a high school student that started, but working with youth groups and things like that. Didn't drive a bus again until about 7 or 8 years ago. I was serving a church in south of Dover in Camden, and there were signs everywhere that said, bus drivers needed. And, so how Delaware is more of a village than a state. And, so that felt like a personal appeal to me, and it was something I could do. And so I sat down with the church that I was serving at the time, and I said, I'd like to do this. And so got back into it, ended up not being able to serve as a bus driver or drive for the next 3 years after that initial year. But when we came down to Rehoboth Beach after COVID, the dust from COVID sort of cleared, I started driving for Cape Henlopen. And so this starts my 5th year this month of driving a group of kindergarten through 5th graders in the elementary school, Love Creek Elementary School, and then a group of high schoolers. So I've got 2 routes.
Do you view this through your ministry lens when you're
Oh,
doing it?
absolutely. And it's not just me. It was interesting at the church that I served, one that I told you about south of Dover, the group, I originally said, look, I won't be able to be into the church until 9 in the morning or, a little bit before 9 in the morning. And then I've got to leave at 2, I'll be happy to curtail some of my hours. And then they were really enthusiastic and said, no, this is the kind of thing that churches do. And we see this as our ministry too. And so they supported that. So I'm not talking about proselytizing, trying to nail people to join the church. I've got a trapped audience on the bus, but just, I don't know. I keep going back to the phrase, being a good human. A lot of Christians are in the news for, all kinds of, I would say, unchristian, I feel like are unchristian kinds of things, the judgmentalism and things like that. And so I think opportunities for people to see Christians behaving like good human beings are doing something in the community that the community's desperate for, a need that the community has, that sort of thing.
So totally understand the not proselytizing part, but
Mhm.
how are you intentional with your charges on the bus?
Yeah, the biggest thing is, I think growing up, perhaps this is true for all of us, but I've got some giants that stood out besides my parents. They were supposed to love me, right? They had to love me. But, like teachers and coaches, there was a fifth grade teacher, James Clay. I didn't call him James, I called him Mr. Clay, who was literally a giant. He had this huge afro. He wore platform shoes, who was just instrumental because in my life, because he believed in me not as a 12-year-old or 11-year-old, but as a human being, and really encouraged me to use the gifts that God had given me. And no, I think there's also a sense of, being a shoulder to cry on, being empathetic and understanding. But I think there's nothing like being taken seriously at that age, and by that age, I mean children and youth. I think, they say that the first word a child learns is no. And because they hear it so often, and I think that continues and maybe even gets worse in teen years.
How soon do they know you're a pastor when you're driving them on the bus?
Yeah, that's not something I lead with, I don't wear, collared shirts and things like that. So, but it'll come up. I wouldn't even think all of the kids on the bus know, because I don't, like I said, generally lead with that. Sometimes they might see me and I'm wearing a tie and they're like, "What's that all about?" And I say, "Oh, I've got a funeral today," or, "I'm burying somebody." You got to unpack that phrase. Um, and so those kinds of things will come up. And my hope is that people would, I don't know, just figure like, well, that tracks, of course, that all depends on what people think about pastors. I would assume that you would have been very judgmental and harsh on, what our cussing and things like that. Not that we have a whole lot of that on the bus. I've got rules.
I was
Yeah.
gonna ask you how you deal with kid-like bad behavior.
Yeah, yeah. I try to whittle the rules down to safety is rule number one, of course, and then respect. And then I ask people to respect themselves and to respect each other. And so, like cussing boils down to, a measure of respect. And so there's I really try to make it more collaborative. I have a very high tolerance for, noise and chaos and things like that.
Yeah.
And we're on a bus, we're not in a library. So the only leverage I have is to move seats. But sometimes they'll do that. Like if it's just you're having a bad day, you need to be separated from somebody, they'll do that themselves. The kindergartner through fifth grade, they have assigned seats. And the high school folks, they sit where they want, but their seats are self-assigned too.
Is there a difference between the morning run and the evening run in terms
Oh
of
yeah.
their moods?
Oh yeah, absolutely,
Tell us
absolutely.
about that.
Yeah, the high school, of course, you don't even know they're there. They got earbuds in and things like that. We'll have conversations when they're coming on and off the bus. But yeah, the afternoons are the meds are wearing off. There's all kinds of things that kind of flow into that. Um, I learned early on that it's best if things are really out of control. And by that, I mean, somebody's just having a bad day. And, so maybe it's like siblings that are, arguing with each other. Although I've got a lot of siblings on the younger bus. And one afternoon I pulled the bus off the road and I said, "All right, siblings, get together right now. I want all siblings to be sitting together because sometimes that's better for them than not." But I learned early on it's best if there's a big problem, just pull off the road and, then we can, address whatever's happening. I had one where they were talking, I had a performative crier. So, the kids were saying so and so is crying and I thought, "Yeah, well, she'll get over it." And then they said she has asthma. And so somebody said she's having trouble breathing. And so I said, "Well, that one I will have to address." So I pulled off the road. And it was really sweet because, everybody got quiet. I didn't have to yell or anything. I went back, I knelt down in front of her and I said, "Okay, just like I know your mom taught you, let's count the breaths in or whatever." She got better. We got back on the road. And a lot of times that's the way, things will work, but I don't have to pull off the road a lot. And the kids who come up front, the closer they move to me, you know how it is in the back of the bus is where the cool kids are. So that's I don't call it punishment, I call it setting them up for success. So if they move up close to me, up at the front of the bus, that's actually a place where then we can talk more.
Yeah.
And so I use that opportunity to, get to know them a little better and then just, more than just an adversarial kind of relationship. Um, I found out this one in kindergarten who's sometimes can be a handful. Um, Really, his mom likes to play Ring My Bell, if you can remember that song from back in the 70s. And so I'll play that for him, especially when he and I are alone on the bus or something. He's the last one to drop off or something. And I don't know, just an opportunity to connect in a human way. Like I said,
Yeah.
instead of just an adversarial kind of way.
Do you hear about home life issues and
Oh, yeah.
problems? Yeah.
Oh, yeah. Yeah. I mean, the first bus I drove was a group of middle school kids, students, one of whom had, I don't remember the name of the condition, but like it was introversion multiplied by 1,000. So they had a problem talking to people.
Uh-huh.
And they had a ramp out front of the house. And I learned from her in bits and snatches that her father had MS and the different rounds of the hits were causing him a lot of problems, mobility problems or something. There was an unfinished ramp in front of the house. And I ended up getting permission from her and from her family and from my supervisor to take some folks from the church over and help finish that ramp for him.
Wow.
Sometimes it's things like that. And one of the great things about the routes that I drive is that we drive year to year. So I get to know kids, parents, on a more personal basis. We have a history and that helps too.
Yeah.
I remember talking to one father and mother, we were having a conference call. And at one point I said, I really, really like your son a lot. And I said, he's smart as a whip. And I said, but sometimes he can be a little too smart for his own good. And they all laughed, they both laughed. They said, yeah, you're absolutely right. And so again, it was sort of collaborating with them instead of, again, being some adversarial school person, putting down their child or something. And I do like to see them do well. I'm not invested in, punishing them or whatever. And that's one of my favorite things is seeing them. I don't get to drive any of the middle schoolers, but I'll see them on field trips occasionally. And that's nice. It's kind of like a little reunion.
Now I'm gonna ask my old fogey question because,
Hmm.
I'm a boomer and I feel intimidated by kids. I
Yeah.
feel so uncool around kids. Like I
Yeah.
don't know
Yeah.
anything. I don't know their music
Yeah.
anymore. I'm still
Yeah.
listening to, Carole King and Cat Stevens.
Yeah,
And
exactly.
what can we learn from, just everyday kids? What do you learn from them and what's your approach to them or what should my approach be to them
Yeah.
rather than
Well,
rather than being intimidated?
no, I hear you. I had
Yeah.
this life-changing experience reading a story about a mother who was really kind of, at her wit's end about a child, her son, who was, on drugs. And so they were back and forth, and he was a teen, and she had all kinds of problems connecting. And she said one day they had a breakthrough when she said, "What's it like to get high? Like, what is that like for you?" And it was sort of let me come into your world rather than, judging your world or something like that. And it's not to say that anything goes, but it that felt to me like the opening of some place where they could both go to perhaps a transformative healing place together that began with, with listening. It's like I don't do this because it's a good thing. I love playing computer games. When I hear one of my students talking about a computer game, sometimes it's a game that I happen to play, and so then I'll say, "Oh, isn't that neat?" And we'll talk about that rather than, saying, "Oh, you should get out more,"
Mhm.
um, or something. And I think, again, to start from a place, because none of us like, for somebody to introduce themselves, by judging us, the style of clothes we wear, that sort of thing. And I think the big thing for me is the reward is it takes so little to to see that response that overcomes that gap that you were talking about, Leanne, of people, youth and children who seem to be so aloof that I've heard older people say, I feel like I'm invisible to,
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
to this person. And I think one thing it's important to realize is that so do they, that they feel invisible in all kinds of ways, and shunted and dismissed and things like that. And I've felt like that. You go through
Mhm.
your high school years and sometimes you're a bit of a cliche, you kind of fall into these patterns or whatever. And that whole developing a personality is necessarily narcissistic. And to have gone through it and to come through feels like, oh good, I don't have to worry about that anymore. But then we bring this extraordinary wealth of experience that you don't get to you don't get to share unless you earn it, by
Right.
developing that relationship. And I think that's an irony that I've read about, the generation gap, especially now, is that, Gen X, Gen Z, those, if you ask them, if like a pollster asks them, they're desperate for mentors. They want adult mentors, but they don't need somebody who comes alongside and says, I could be your mentor because I could fix your life, that sort of
Yeah.
thing. That's not the mentor they want. I just think it's interesting I remember one of my students was, had gotten afoul of the law and, a judge had ordered him to do some, I don't know, remedial kinds of training, safety training for driving. And so I told him, I said, "You know what?" I said, "That's actually gonna lower your insurance." I said, "That can be a good thing in the end. You won't have to pay as much insurance or whatever." And after that conversation, I remember he was getting off the bus and he said, "Thanks for not, jamming all over me for, having to do," because he was ashamed, as most of us would be in a situation like that. And it's like, okay, so the shame part, you've already taken care of yourself, so maybe we can look at what next step might be. Um, I think we don't realize how much we have to give. Those of us who carry a lot of life experience with us, you know, in the way of not just acceptance, but um, friendship, for lack of a better word.
Yeah, I feel non-judgmental and like I could just be there for somebody and just
Hmm.
listen. I think I'm pretty good at listening. So
Yeah.
I just wanted to ask you, and I don't want to put you on the spot, but has there
Mhm.
been a case where you've changed a life or stopped something terrible from happening or just been
Yeah.
transformative in some way
No, it's
with some of these kids, one or more of these kids?
yeah. Actually, the first year I drove, we had an incident where, and again, this is only in Delaware. Friday night, I get this call from a member of the church who's a realtor who had gotten a call from one of her clients who had recently moved into the area, whose neighbor's daughter, if you can follow all those
I
six
might have to
degrees
put
of
up a
separation.
chart.
Yeah, exactly. I think we need a chart. But so her neighbor's daughter had been sitting beside a student on my bus, and had the student had told her that she wanted to kill herself. She
Mm,
was, 7 years old, 8 years old,
wow.
and so I get this call. It's about 9 o'clock at night. We've got route sheets, so I've got numbers and addresses for parents and that sort of thing. So I tried to call the parents immediately, and then I couldn't get in touch with them, so I went to the house. It's about 9:45, and they didn't have to tell me, but they ended up telling me that they had another child who was coming back from an inpatient. I think it was kind of a psychiatric kind of evaluation kind of situation, and the family was very anxious about not being ready for him to come home. And I think the child was taking a lot of that on herself. Now again, I didn't have to
Mhm.
follow up on all that. I felt my job was, just let the parents know, after this very interesting sort of connection, through a neighbor who realized that this woman went to church and she knew that their bus driver was a pastor, so she did know about that connection. And this past week, I went to a ceremony. I guess it was a concert at the elementary school, and saw this student up on the top riser singing, and just thought that was, I don't know, that was something special. And if again, I think life works in a way that most of the miracles and the grace that surrounds our life, we don't begin to even know about. And so, um, I think this particular student treated her like I treat them all. One of the first things I do at the beginning of the year is I know all their names. I learn all their names, so like the back of my hand, so that I actually say their name 4 times a day. So when they get
Mhm.
on the bus, when I drop them at school, when they come back on the bus after school, how to go, and then when they leave for home. And it makes a difference. They say your name's the best thing you can hear. And then like I said, it's real fresh because it was fun seeing her singing.
I can't, you just saying their name, you know,
Right.
uh,
Yeah.
I I think that's a real affirmation of something, just that you're an adult, you're an authority figure of sorts, and
Yeah.
you're just recognizing them by name.
Yeah. And
That would be important.
that's a school system wide thing. And a lot of school systems in Delaware that I've been part of, I'll never forget there was a board on the teacher's lounge wall with the picture of every child in the school. And they were tracking interactions that were not like teacher student interaction in the classroom, just interactions in the hall saying hello, so that they could zero in on the students that needed something special.
Wow.
I thought that was incredible. When I dropped the students off at elementary school, there's someone greeting them by name as well from, the staff. There's several staff members that do that. They're real big on that. So that's something that I didn't just bring. And that's been a great thing as I love my colleagues, on the bus, it does feel like, we're taken seriously as part of the team. That includes teachers, administrators, and, the custodians, the folks that serve lunch and things like that. In fact, we've got several of those folks who are part of the church, and so it's fun when we see each other at school.
Mhm.
Um,
Another thing that interests me is that so many people, it's almost like cool to hate your job, and,
yeah,
I mean, I guess, how can people with jobs that might otherwise seem
yeah,
routine derive joy? Because I see joy, from your
yeah,
bus
yeah,
driving. How can they, derive joy or mindfulness or inspiration or something from your approach to driving a school bus if they're in what they think is kind of a dead end, boring, routine job?
yeah. Well, what is it? Brother Lawrence, who wrote the Practice of the Presence of God, was some monk a long time ago who famously said, that while he was washing dishes at the monastery, he could just practice God's presence or something. I'm not sure if that's something I'm capable of doing. One of the things I remember telling my dad was that um, every day was different, especially the younger kids, that, seating them is like a Rubik's Cube that changes the challenge changes every day. Because like I said, if a couple of siblings, a couple of longtime friends aren't getting along on a particular day. Today I had one fifth grader who normally doesn't ride the bus, but was sitting in a seat that made a couple of kids change their seats. And then all of a sudden there was almost this full blown thing. So I think sometimes precisely those things that don't go according to plan, for which we're called to bring some kind of answer. It's sort of like there was a great line in Avatar where the character said, "I may not be much of a horse rider, but I was born to do this." And I think, kind of sensing that in whatever it is that we're doing, that I'm unique. I bring something unique to this particular challenge, no matter what it is, rather than just being a cog.
Yeah.
And there are a lot of cog days. I get up early.
Yeah, how early do you have to get
Uh,
up to do this?
yeah,
I
you
should a
yeah, 5:45. That's my rising
Okay,
time. But let me tell you,
right.
after a couple of months, we pick jobs on seniority. So the route that I got left at 4:15 AM. So that was a three that was a 3:30 wake up. So I gotta tell you, 5:45 feels like luxuriating.
Yeah, that's not so bad.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. So
I
because
went Go
yeah.
ahead.
Well, many of the drivers for Cape Henlopen School District drive for the Sussex Consortium School. So, that's a school that caters to special needs of all kinds, emotional, developmental, and that's people will move from far away because of that school. And our buses drive literally all over the county to
Wow.
pick them up. And so that 4:15 departure was so that we could get back to Beacon at 7:30. So over 3 hours later after driving to pick up 5 students.
Holy
Um,
cow.
are staffed with a driver and a monitor.
Mhm.
And, to be with the kids and to make sure they're okay. I'll tell you the biggest reason is not because of their developmental problems, but they've got to sit on a bus for all that time.
That's crazy.
Oh my
Yeah.
gosh, yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
How about, have you do you encounter, like, bullying, mean girls, the social strata of public school a lot? Do you see that on the bus?
Yeah, there've been a couple of times where I feel like I would chalk it up to they say that hurt people.
Yeah.
And I've blessedly been able to get around those situations because the student for whatever reason wasn't a regular rider. But there were a couple of challenges where I had to sit down face to face and say, you got to ease up. Now, most of those I fixed with distance. Because
Yeah.
bus is pretty big, and so there's a lot of distance between one place and another. Although I'll tell you, when students have to pass one another, that's something that you have to watch well. And so, yeah, so there've been some instances. The district also provides, and I did this occasionally, trips home after athletic practice and school,
Mhm.
drama practice or whatever. So I wasn't aware of this when I started driving, but that's something else that the district provides. So if parents can't drive kids back and forth, they can still play football or act in the school play or the chorus or something. And so I was driving a group of kids home and, it was dark, it was in the winter, so the whole bus was dark. And so a scuffle breaks out, a couple of guys were getting upset with each other. So there weren't any cars around. I stopped the bus and I said, is there a problem? And they had separated themselves. Like they realized, we don't need to be together right now.
Yeah.
So that was actually a
That's pretty
self.
mature.
Yeah. So that's like that out of kindergartners. But so with my kindergartners, I mentioned the monitors that are, professional monitors who are assigned. I mean, the buses cannot roll without the monitor being. So if you just have a driver but no monitor, that bus is prohibited from picking up
Oh,
the
okay.
students. But so I use my fifth graders for those. The kindergartners really need to learn how to ride a bus. I mean, good heavens, they're 5 years old. And so, so then I have fifth graders, and that's neat to be able to say, you all are leaders. That's what I remember Mr. Clay telling me a long, long time ago. You guys are leaders, and so thank you for being able to, to help me out. And so a lot of times, I'll get on the horn and I'll say, so and so needs somebody to sit with them right now. And then, sometimes I have to call out a name, but a lot of times one of my fifth graders will come up and, you know, meet the challenge.
Yeah.
That must really mean something to them as well. To be counted on so that they're not just a bother. I don't know how many 11-year-olds, feel empowered in life.
I, uh I can tell you get a great deal of satisfaction and joy out of it. I've
Absolutely.
always wanted to ask you more about it, so I'm glad
Aw,
we had this conversation.
thanks,
Uh,
Leanne.
Before
Uh,
we sign off, I know you're a voracious reader. So, I just
yeah.
wanted to ask you, what are
uh,
you reading or read recently that you would like to share with us or recommend to us?
Well, my favorite author lately is Amor Towles. It's a strange name, but it's Towles. My first novel was A Gentleman in Moscow,
I
and
just read that. Yeah.
one of the interesting things is Amor Towles writes about. I mean, he includes children who feature
Mhm.
very prominently in his stories, and so I think maybe that's one of the things. But he's also just a phenomenal writer. But I just discovered A Table for Two, or I just had it in my list, and it came up. It's a collection of short stories, which normally I hate, because about the time I fall in love with them, and I find the rhythm, the story's over. But this was a wonderful collection. They're longish short stories. I have to say, so it's not a collection of like 20 or 30 of them. There's maybe, I don't know, 8 to 10 of them, but it's called A Table for Two. That's has to be my favorite book. Besides Frederick Bachman, I
Hmm.
he's a go-to for me as well.
I just read it in the last month or so, Gentleman in Moscow. Have you read Lincoln Highway?
Oh, yes, yeah, and
Okay.
another wonderful one, Rules of Civility.
Yeah.
There's and Rules of Civility doesn't prominently feature children as
Hmm.
major characters, but Lincoln Highway certainly did. Um,
Yeah.
and,
All
so I
right.
think,
Well,
yeah,
I really thank you for your time, and I'll see
thank
you
you,
in
Leanne.
church.
Yes, absolutely. Yeah.
Thank you for listening to Faith, Hope, and Stories. This episode was produced by Leanne Walling. For more information on Epworth United Methodist Church, please go to our website at epworth.faith.